What do you do when they come for everyone you love? When the laws change overnight and suddenly you're not a citizen anymore, you're a target. When 80% of your people are going to be murdered, and you know it's coming. Roza Papo was a Jewish doctor in Yugoslavia in 1941. She had every reason to hide, every reason to run. Instead, she walked into the mountains with a medical bag and spent the next 4 years saving lives in conditions that would break most people. This is what happened to her. Now, most people have never heard of Roza Papo, but by the time this story ends, you'll understand why she became one of the most remarkable figures to emerge from the Second World War. A Sephardic Jewish woman who graduated from medical school just as the world was about to collapse, who joined the Partisans when doing so meant almost certain death, and who would eventually become the first female general in the entire Balkans. Her story deserves to be remembered. Roza Papo was born on February 6, 1914, in the city of Sarajevo. At that time, Sarajevo was still part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and the First World War hadn't even begun yet. Her family was Sephardic Jewish, meaning their ancestors had fled Spain during the Inquisition back in 1492. For over 400 years, these Sephardic Jews had made the Balkans their home. They spoke Ladino, a language descended from medieval Spanish. They built synagogues and communities across the region. They became merchants, craftsmen, doctors, and scholars. Her mother, Mirjama, was the daughter of a rabbi from a small town called Gračanica in northeastern Bosnia. So right from the beginning, Rosa came from a family with deep religious roots and strong traditions. Judaism wasn't just a cultural identity for the Papo family. It was woven into their daily lives, their traditions, their sense of who they were. This heritage would be both a source of strength and a target on her back in the years to come. But Rosa was also ambitious, exceptionally so. After finishing her education at a gymnasium in Sarajevo, she made a decision that was unusual for a young Jewish woman in that era. She enrolled at the Faculty of Medicine at the University of Zagreb, one of the most prestigious medical schools in the entire region. Think about what that meant. This was the 1930s. Women in medicine were still rare throughout Europe. Jewish women pursuing medical degrees were even rare. The path was filled with obstacles, both official and unofficial. Society expected women to marry, to raise children, to stay home. But Rosa pushed forward anyway, determined to become a doctor, determined to heal. She studied for years in Zagreb, mastering anatomy, physiology, pharmacology, and all the other disciplines that would prepare her to save lives. She graduated in 1939 with a Doctor of Sciences in Medicine degree. The same year, by the way, that Nazi Germany invaded Poland and ignited the Second World War. The same year, the entire world began its descent into chaos. After graduation, she returned to Bosnia and started working as a physician, first at the main hospital in Sarajevo, then at smaller posts in places called Begov Han and Olivo. She was building a career, learning her craft, treating patients. She had no way of knowing that within 2 years, everything she'd worked for would be torn away, that the degree she had earned through years of hard work would become worthless in the eyes of a regime that cared only about the blood in her veins. What Rosa also did during these years was get involved in left-wing political activities. Many educated young Jews in Yugoslavia were drawn to socialist and communist movements, which promised equality and an end to ethnic discrimination. This political orientation would prove decisive when she faced the choice between hiding and resistance. On April 6, 1941, the Axis powers invaded Yugoslavia. German, Italian, Hungarian, and Bulgarian forces attacked from all directions simultaneously. It was a coordinated assault designed to crush the country quickly and completely. The Yugoslav army, unprepared and outmatched, collapsed in just 11 days. And what came next was catastrophic for everyone, but especially for Jews. The country was carved up into pieces, like a carcass divided among wolves. Bosnia, along with Croatia, became part of something called the independent state of Croatia, a puppet state run by the Ustash, a fascist movement that modeled itself on the Nazis and was fanatically anti-Semitic. The Ustaše didn't waste any time. Within weeks of taking power, they enacted racial laws modeled directly on Nazi Germany's Nuremberg laws. By April 30th, 1941, just 3 weeks after the invasion began, Jews were ordered to wear a distinctive yellow badge. It was oblong in shape, printed with the letter Z for Židov, meaning Jew in Croatian. The directive required the badge to be worn on both the chest and the back. There would be no hiding who you were. Jews were forbidden from entering restaurants, coffee houses, cinemas, and theaters. They could only visit local markets after 10 at night, when everything was closed. Their property was confiscated, their businesses were seized, their citizenship was stripped away. The official newspaper of the regime published hundreds of anti-Semitic pieces in 1941 alone, sometimes 3 per day, accusing Jews of dominating finance, provoking war, and threatening the Croatian nation. And then came the deportations, the killings, and the camps. For the Jews of Sarajevo, this was the beginning of the end. Before the war, somewhere between 8,000 and 12,000 Jews lived in the city. Sarajevo had been called Little Jerusalem because of its vibrant Jewish community. The city had 15 synagogues. Jews made up nearly 20% of the population. They had lived there for 4 centuries. Now, all of that would be destroyed. By the end of the Holocaust, 85% of Sarajevo's Jews would be dead, murdered in places like Jasenovac, the largest concentration camp in the Balkans. The United States Holocaust Memorial Museum estimates that the Ustaše murdered between 77,000 and 99,000 people at Jasenovac between 1941 and 1945. Among them were between 12,000 and 20,000 Jews. The camp was so brutal that even some Nazi officials were reportedly disturbed by the methods used there. But Rosa Papo wasn't going to wait for them to come for her. Shortly after the invasion, she made contact with the Partisan resistance operating on Mount Ozren in northeastern Bosnia. At first, she collaborated with them secretly, providing medical assistance while still working as a civilian doctor. It was incredibly dangerous. If discovered, she would have been killed immediately. But she understood that doing nothing was not really an option. By December 1941, she made her choice. She officially joined the Ozren Partisan detachment. She also joined the Communist Party of Yugoslavia in 1942, formalizing her commitment to the liberation movement. This was an extraordinarily dangerous decision. At that point, the resistance movement was still in its infancy. The partisans were poorly armed, poorly supplied, and hunted relentlessly by German forces, Italian forces, Ustaša militias, and collaborators of every kind. For a Jewish woman to join meant facing double persecution. If caught, she would be killed both as a partisan and as a Jew. There would be no mercy, no trial, just execution. But Rosa understood something important. The alternative, waiting and hoping, was no alternative at all. By the end of 1941, the majority of Yugoslavia's Jews had already been murdered. Her first role was as director of the hospital of the Ozren Partisan detachment. Now, calling it a hospital is generous. These weren't facilities with clean beds, modern equipment, and reliable electricity. They were hidden structures in forests and mountains, sometimes caves carved into hillsides, sometimes wooden huts camouflaged against aerial surveillance, sometimes just tents or lean-tos that could be dismantled and moved at a moment's notice. The locations were kept secret by elaborate security measures. Patients were blindfolded during transport, so they couldn't reveal the location if captured. Roofs were disguised with branches and earth to avoid detection from the air. Medical staff wore white clothing in winter to blend with the snow. The approaches to hospitals were protected by minefields and machine gun nests. Sterilization of instruments was only done at night, when the smoke from fires wouldn't be visible. Wounded soldiers were transported from battlefield to hospital by truck, cart, horseback, stretcher, or on foot. These journeys could take anywhere from 1 week to 6 weeks, depending on the terrain and enemy activity. A soldier might survive being shot, only to die during the transport, because proper care couldn't be provided quickly enough. And less than 70% of the wounded ever returned fit for frontline duty. And when the dreaded Prokret came, the movement order, everything had to be packed up immediately. Civilians, livestock, and the wounded walked in long disciplined columns over the mountains, usually at night. There was no permanent hospital, no rest, no convalescence. You either walked with the army or you were left behind to face whatever came. Every precaution was necessary, because when the Germans found these hospitals, they didn't just capture them, they destroyed them, and everyone inside. The conditions inside partisan hospitals were brutal beyond anything most of us can imagine. A 1944 report in Time magazine described partisan medicine in blunt terms. The correspondent who had been allowed into Yugoslavia reported that Tito's forces had the highest percentage of amputations in the world, except perhaps the Chinese army. Medical supplies were desperately scarce. Bandages had to be washed and reused 10, 12 times or more. Surgery was sometimes performed without anesthesia, with only the occasional shot of rakia, fruit brandy, to dull the pain. In 1942, Rosa experienced the dangers of this life firsthand during combat operations on Mount Ozron. During an air raid, she refused to take shelter. She didn't want to be seen as a coward by her fellow partisans. An airplane bomb exploded nearby. Shrapnel struck her face. She nearly lost an eye from the blast. But she kept working. What else could she do? At some point during the war, she also contracted typhus, the deadly disease spread by lice that claimed countless lives in the partisan ranks. Typhus epidemics were a constant threat throughout the resistance. In 1944, the Yugoslav army actually had to halt an offensive because too many soldiers were sick and dying from the disease. Rosa survived that too. Many didn't. The experience would later inform her decision to specialize in infectious diseases after the war. In March 1943, she organized and directed a large partisan hospital in the village of Donja Trovna near Bielina. She had evacuated wounded fighters from Lovnica Monastery and the Shekovici area, moving them through enemy territory to this new location. Later, she became director of the Mobile Surgical Army Hospital, a position she held until the war's end. In this role, she served directly under Josip Broz Tito, leading the recruitment system for medical personnel and commanding the network of different partisan field hospitals. She was promoted to captain in 1943. By the war's end in 1945, she had achieved the rank of major. To understand what Rosa Papo accomplished, you have to understand the broader context of what was happening in Yugoslavia during these years. The partisans fought not 1 but 7 major enemy offensives. These weren't small skirmishes. They were massive, coordinated attempts by Axis forces to destroy the resistance once and for all. And 2 of them, the battles of Nereteva and Suceska in 1943, nearly destroyed the movement entirely. The Battle of Suceska, in particular, was catastrophic. From May 15th to June 16th, approximately 127,000 Axis troops attempted to encircle and annihilate the main partisan force of around 22,000 fighters. The partisans were trapped between the Tara and Piva rivers in the mountains of Montenegro, Herzegovina, and eastern Bosnia. The terrain was brutal. The supplies were nearly exhausted. The partisans had about 2,000 wounded soldiers who needed to be protected and moved. Every decision involved impossible trade-offs between military necessity and moral obligation. On June 9th, Tito himself was nearly killed when a bomb exploded near his position, wounding him in the arm. Over 7,000 partisan fighters were killed in the battle. That's more than a third of their entire force. And here's the part that haunts me most. Hundreds of wounded partisans couldn't be evacuated during the breakthrough. They were hidden by nurses and medical staff in makeshift shelters throughout the mountains. The central hospital, traveling with the main partisan group, became one of the primary targets. The 3rd Shock Division was assigned to protect it. The Germans searched the terrain with dogs, systematically combing through forests and caves. And when they found wounded partisans, they killed them, almost to the last, along with the nurses and doctors caring for them. A German report from the 1st Mountain Division stated it plainly. Captured 498, of which 411 were shot. About 700 immobile wounded were hidden by partisans with their nurses. The Germans found and killed almost all of them. The medical corps Rosa Papo served in was at the center of this horror. The 3rd Shock Division, which was protecting the central hospital during the Suceska offensive, sent a message to headquarters that captured the desperation. "We are staying with the wounded. We are going into a breakthrough." The commander of that division, Sava Kovacevic, was killed trying to break through German lines on June 13th. Through all of this, Rosa Papo survived. She kept treating the wounded. She kept organizing medical care. She kept doing her job, day after day, in conditions that would break most people. But when liberation finally came in 1945, she discovered the full extent of what she had lost. Both her parents had been murdered in the Holocaust. Both her siblings had been killed. Her mother and all 4 of her aunts had died in concentration camps. She was, for all practical purposes, the sole survivor of her immediate family. Think about that for a moment. She had spent 4 years fighting to liberate her country. She had risked her life countless times. She had treated thousands of wounded soldiers, and now she came home to find that there was no home left, no parents waiting for her, no siblings to embrace. Just absence, just emptiness, just the knowledge that while she had been saving strangers in the mountains, her own family had been murdered in camps she couldn't reach and couldn't save them from. This personal tragedy reflected the broader catastrophe that befell Yugoslav Jewry. Of the approximately 82,000 Jews living in Yugoslavia before the war, more than 67,000, over 80%, were murdered in the Holocaust. The Germans and their Axis partners destroyed more than 100 Jewish religious organizations. They killed Jews from Zagreb to Belgrade to Sarajevo. They burned synagogues, looted Jewish homes, and turned centuries of culture into ashes and memory. The Sephardic heritage that Rosa's family had preserved for 400 years, the Ladino language, the traditions brought from Spain, the community that had flourished in Sarajevo, all of it was nearly extinguished. And yet, here's what makes the Yugoslav story unique. Jewish participation in the partisan resistance was remarkable. More remarkable, in fact, than anywhere else in Europe. According to historian Jascha Romano's definitive 1980 study, 4,572 Jews officially joined Tito's partisans. 3,000 of them served in fighting units. 1,318 of them died in combat. 10 Jews received the Order of National Hero, Yugoslavia's highest military decoration. 150 received the First Fighters Medal, awarded to those who joined the resistance in 1941, the most dangerous year of all. What distinguished the Yugoslav resistance from partisan movements elsewhere was its complete integration of Jewish fighters. Unlike in Eastern Europe, where Jews sometimes faced anti-Semitism even within partisan ranks, and often had to fight in separate Jewish units, Yugoslav Jews were warmly received and suffered no discrimination. They served as equals throughout the command structure. There was nothing Jewish about the makeup of the units in which they served. They were simply partisans. One historian noted something remarkable. Yugoslavia had more Jewish generals than Israel. Jews held key positions at all levels of the partisan movement. Moshe Piade, a Sephardic Jew from Belgrade and one of Tito's closest advisors, authored the regulations governing liberated territories and later became chairman of the Yugoslav National Assembly. Among the Jewish medical workers in the partisan movement, there were over 1,000. Approximately half were women. This included 384 nurses, 39 physicians, 19 medics, and 18 pharmacists. More than 100 of these women lost their lives during the fighting. Of the 39 Jewish women physicians who served, 13 died in combat. Rosa Papo was one of the survivors, and she wasn't finished making history. After the war ended, she returned briefly to Sarajevo, but her family home no longer existed. She lived in a hotel for a time before moving to Belgrade to specialize in medicine. She chose infectology, the study of infectious diseases, a field desperately needed in the country desperately by war, typhus epidemics, and the destruction of its medical infrastructure. She married Dr. Roza Papo, himself a partisan, who would become one of Yugoslavia's most distinguished war surgeons. Isidore had also fought throughout the war, including at the battles of Neretva and Suceska. He had treated wounded and sick civilians suffering from typhus, sometimes carrying patients to the hospital on his back. He had experienced the same horror that Rosa had. The Ustash killed over 50 members of his family, including his brother and sister. 2 survivors who had lost everything, building a life together from the ruins. Isidore eventually rose to the rank of general colonel and became an academician. In 2013, on the centenary of his birth, a bust was unveiled at the Military Medical Academy commemorating his contributions. Rosa's post-war achievements in medicine were groundbreaking. In 1961, she became the first head of the newly founded Clinic for Infectious Diseases at the Military Medical Academy in Belgrade. She was recognized as one of Yugoslavia's first infectologists. She introduced liver biopsies as a diagnostic method. She advanced the precise diagnosis of viral hepatitis and hyperbilirubinemia. She improved techniques for diagnosing tuberculosis and purulent meningitis. She became an assistant professor in 1959 and a full professor in 1965. Over her career, she published more than 50 scientific papers. She formulated the first criteria for the selection of military physicians in Yugoslavia and served as president of the main military medical commission of the Yugoslav People's Army. The woman who had once operated in caves with reused bandages was now shaping the entire medical corps of a nation. In 1952, she became the first woman to achieve the rank of colonel in the Yugoslav People's Army. Think about what that meant in the early 1950s. Women generals were virtually unheard of anywhere in the world. The glass ceilings in military establishments were as solid as concrete bunkers. But Rosa kept rising. And then, on July 4, 1973, came the historic moment. She was promoted to Major General of the Medical Service, the first woman general in all the Balkans. She became known affectionately as the General with Braids. The phrase in Serbo-Croatian was even more poetic, pletenic opšivene plemenitoš, meaning braids sewn with nobility. Only one other woman, Dr. Slava Blažević, would ever achieve general rank in the Yugoslav People's Army. For her service during and after the war, Rosa Papo received 6 medals: the Commemorative Medal of the Partisans of 1941, the highest honor for World War II partisans, the Order of Bravery, awarded in October 1944, the Order of Merits for the People in 1952, the Order of the Yugoslav Army in 1956, the Order of Brotherhood and Unity in 1960, and the Order of Military Merit with a Big Star in 1971. Each medal represented years of sacrifice and service. She maintained close ties with the Semberia region, where she had organized the Partisan Hospital, regularly attending reunions with fellow combatants. The bonds forged in those mountain hospitals lasted a lifetime. Dr. Roza Papo died on February 25, 1984, in Belgrade, at 70 years old, and was buried with full military honors. Today, a street in Bijeljina bears her name. Her story has been commemorated in scholarly literature, including a poem published in the academic journal Nasham that imagines her experience. Hidden hospitals marked only by code names, the poem says. Sterilization only at night to hide smoke. Constant threat from Ustar and Nazi forces hunting wounded in hospitals. Her photograph appears in the Jewish Women's Archive, showing her among fellow resistance fighters in 1944. Her biography is preserved in Serbian encyclopedias of distinguished Jews, and researchers continue to study her life and contributions. But beyond the honors and the historical records, there's something else worth remembering about Rosa Papo, something that transcends the facts and dates. When she refused to take shelter during that air raid in 1942, it wasn't just stubbornness or recklessness, it was a statement, a refusal to let fear determine her actions, a commitment to standing alongside her comrades, whatever the cost. When she joined the Partisans as a Jewish woman in 1941, she knew the odds. Most of Yugoslavia's Jews were already dead or dying. The rational choice would have been to hide, to flee, to hope someone else would do the fighting. Instead, she picked up a medical bag and went to work in conditions that would have broken most people. And when she returned from the war to find her entire family murdered, she didn't retreat into grief. She kept building, kept teaching, kept pushing boundaries, until she became something nobody thought possible. A woman, a Jew, a general. The Yugoslav Partisan movement offered Jews something rare in wartime Europe, the chance to fight back as equals, not as victims waiting for rescue, but as fighters with agency and purpose. Not as people defined by what was done to them, but by what they chose to do. Rosa Papo seized that chance with both hands, and in doing so, she became not merely a survivor, but a maker of history.